What if the most dangerous signal before a storm is not thunder, lightning, or howling winds, but silence? What if the quiet moments that feel oddly peaceful are not a reprieve, but the most deceptive warning nature gives? And what if the stillness you sense in the air is not safety at all, but the final preparation of the atmosphere before it unleashes its fury? For centuries, people living along storm-prone coastlines have described an eerie experience before landfall, the sudden hush of the environment. The birds stop calling, the rustling leaves grow still, and the wind seems to vanish altogether. This unnatural silence, sometimes described as the calm before the storm, has entered our language as a metaphor for temporary peace before chaos. But in the context of hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons, this silence is no metaphor. It is a physical reality, and one that carries profound danger. Modern research into hurricane dynamics, such as the work by Dr. Matthew Eastin and the US Hurricane Research Division, helps us understand why silence occurs before impact. These studies show that the atmosphere undergoes complex shifts as the storm approaches. Wind speeds may temporarily drop, soundscapes may quiet, and environmental noise, usually so constant we barely notice it, can suddenly disappear. Yet this calm does not signal safety. Instead, it marks the storm's structure gathering strength, consolidating energy, and preparing to strike with devastating force. To understand this phenomenon, let's begin with the basics of hurricane structure. A hurricane is not a chaotic mess of wind and rain. It is a highly organized system. At its heart lies the eye, a region often characterized by relative calm. Surrounding the eye is the eyewall, the ring of towering thunderstorms where winds reach their greatest velocity and rainfall is most intense. Beyond the eyewall stretch spiraling rain bands that sweep across vast distances. As a hurricane approaches land, residents may sometimes experience an unsettling quiet. This can occur in several ways. The first is when outer rain bands have passed, leaving a temporary lull before the eyewall arrives. Winds may drop, rain may stop, and the landscape falls into a hushed anticipation. The second occurs inside the eye itself. When the eyewall has battered a region and the eye passes overhead, conditions can shift from chaos to sudden tranquility. Skies may clear, winds may drop to near zero, and an eerie silence descends. For those who do not understand the storm's structure, this can be disastrously misleading. The silence carries physical explanations. Hurricanes generate enormous amounts of environmental noise, howling winds, crashing waves, rattling debris. When those forces pause, either in the lull before the eyewall or in the center of the eye, the relative quiet feels extreme. It is not that the world is truly silent. Rather, the removal of background noise reveals how much we rely on constant sound to measure safety. This sudden absence creates a psychological illusion of peace. Dr. Eastin's work emphasizes that these quiet intervals are integral to storm dynamics. The eyewall, where the most destructive winds reside, cannot maintain continuous force as it rotates. Small fluctuations and internal reorganizations create brief lulls in wind speed. Similarly, when the eye crosses over, the absence of strong updrafts produces deceptively calm conditions. But behind these moments lurks the other side of the eyewall, ready to return with equal or greater violence. The US Hurricane Research Division has studied the atmospheric structure of storm eyes for decades, documenting how pressure gradients and wind shear create these zones of silence. Their data confirm what coastal residents already know. Silence is not safety. It is structure. It is physics. It is the storm preparing for its next act. Throughout history, this silence has misled many. Survivors of hurricanes often recount how neighbors emerged during the eye, mistaking the quiet for the storm's end. Families walked outside, inspected damage, and even began cleanup. Then the back half of the storm struck, with winds coming from the opposite direction, often stronger than before. Many who failed to return to shelter in time were caught in the most violent phase. The silence, far from safety, had lured them into exposure. Consider the case of Hurricane Charlie in 2004. As the compact but intense storm crossed Florida, its eye brought brief calm to certain areas. Reports tell of residents stepping outside into sunny skies, only to be slammed minutes later by catastrophic winds. Emergency managers have since repeated the warning: if it gets quiet, stay inside. It is not over. The silence is a trap laid by the storm's structure. The psychological effect of silence adds another layer of danger. Humans are conditioned to equate noise with activity and quiet with peace. When the wind stops and the birds fall silent, it can trigger a false sense of relief. But the atmosphere is only rearranging itself, not ceasing its assault. In some ways, the silence is more threatening than the noise, because it masks the danger and tempts people to let down their guard. Silence also extends beyond wind. Environmental soundscapes, the chorus of insects, birds, and human activity, often vanish before landfall. Animals instinctively retreat, creating an unnatural absence of life. The ocean, once roaring with waves, may suddenly flatten into glassy stillness under the eye's subsiding winds. This combination of atmospheric and biological silence reinforces the illusion that the threat has passed. Yet, as history shows, the greatest destruction often follows immediately after. Why, then, should silence never be considered safe? The answer lies in both physics and human vulnerability. Hurricanes are rotational systems. The side that follows the eye typically brings winds from a new direction, tearing apart structures already weakened. If a roof held against one direction of force, it may collapse under the reversed onslaught. Floodwaters, too, often surge higher after the lull as wind-driven waves push inland. To step outside in the silence is to step into the storm's unfinished assault. There is also the matter of timing. Silence before impact is not random. It is a function of storm proximity. When the wind dies and the environment grows still, it often means the eyewall is close. The atmosphere is tightening, the pressure is dropping, and the most violent phase is about to begin. To misinterpret silence as safety is to ignore the physics that define the storm. Cultural memory captures this lesson vividly. In coastal folklore, phrases like "the quiet before the beast" or "the whisper before the scream" emphasize that silence is not comfort but omen. Farmers in the Philippines recall how typhoons bring a strange stillness, the air heavy and suffocating just before devastation. Fishermen in Florida talk about the sea growing eerily flat, a sign to rush home before it is too late. Across languages and regions, silence has always meant one thing: prepare. The danger of misinterpretation persists even today. Despite advanced forecasts, residents continue to be caught by the storm's deceptive calm. In part, this is because silence plays on human psychology as much as meteorological science. We crave reassurance, and silence offers it, falsely. Emergency agencies now emphasize public education, repeating the same warning in every storm: do not mistake the calm for the end. Scientific studies reinforce the urgency of this message. Dr. Eastin's analysis shows how atmospheric dynamics create structured lulls, not endings. The US Hurricane Research Division's models demonstrate how the eye's calm is encircled by maximum danger. These findings converge on a simple truth: silence is not absence, it is transition. Understanding this matters because climate change is producing more intense hurricanes. As storms grow stronger, their eyes may become more defined, their silences more dramatic, and their dangers more severe. Communities must learn not only to fear the roar of the storm, but also to fear its quiet. Both are part of the same cycle. Both carry risk. So, what should we take away from the atmospheric silence before impact? We should recognize it as the storm's mask, not its mercy. The stillness of the air, the absence of sound, the deceptive peace, these are signals of proximity, not departure. To survive, we must resist the urge to step outside, to believe the worst is over. The silence is the eye's gift and its curse. Because the truth is this: silence is not safety. Silence is the storm's most dangerous trick. And those who mistake it for peace may not survive to hear the noise that follows. Picture a coastal neighborhood in Florida just hours before a hurricane's landfall. The morning had been filled with gusty winds, rattling windows, and the steady roar of surf pounding the shoreline. Yet suddenly, in the early afternoon, everything changes. The wind drops to nothing. Trees stand motionless, and even the sound of the ocean dulls into an eerie stillness. For residents unfamiliar with hurricanes, this moment feels almost miraculous, a pause that brings relief after hours of tension. But meteorologists and emergency managers know better. That silence is not mercy. It is the signal that the storm's eye is near, and the most dangerous phase is about to begin. This unsettling experience has been recorded repeatedly across history. In 1935, during the infamous Labor Day hurricane, the most intense hurricane ever to strike the United States, survivors in the Florida Keys described how the winds ceased, leaving a terrifying quiet. People emerged from shelters, thinking the storm had passed, only to be caught unprepared as the back eyewall roared in with winds exceeding 180 miles per hour. The false sense of peace claimed lives, not because the storm lacked warning, but because silence misled people into vulnerability. Scientific explanations for this phenomenon lie in atmospheric physics. Dr. Matthew Eastin's research into pre-landfall hurricane dynamics outlines how pressure gradients shift as storms approach land. The steep drop in barometric pressure creates unusual vertical movements in the atmosphere. Wind fields, instead of flowing steadily, sometimes reorganize, producing local lulls. These lulls can manifest as a sudden quiet, even when the eyewall's violence is only minutes away. Silence also results from the structure of the storm eye itself. The US Hurricane Research Division has extensively studied this region, finding that the eye is formed by intense convection in the eyewall that pushes air upward, leaving behind a subsiding core. Within this core, descending air suppresses cloud formation and reduces wind speed dramatically. To someone standing on the ground, it feels like a serene pause, even though it is surrounded on all sides by the most violent part of the storm. But beyond meteorological mechanics, the experience of silence also involves sound perception. Hurricanes generate constant background noise, gusting winds, clattering debris, crashing waves. When these noises cease, whether because the eye passes overhead or because wind fields briefly weaken, the human brain interprets the sudden absence as tranquility. In reality, the silence is relative. The storm is still present, but our ears notice the difference in intensity more than the absolute conditions. This psychological effect magnifies the deception, tempting people to believe the worst has ended. Case studies across regions reveal the danger of this misperception. In the Philippines, where typhoons frequently strike, survivors often describe how villages grew unnervingly quiet just before the storm's peak. Children were sometimes sent outside, thinking the danger had passed, only for families to be caught by catastrophic winds minutes later. After Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, emergency managers documented tragic instances where residents mistook the eye's silence for safety and failed to return indoors in time. For many, the second half of the storm proved even deadlier than the first. Japan's coastal communities have similar records. Typhoon Vera in 1959, one of the deadliest storms to hit the country, produced accounts of eerie calm in Nagoya. Survivors later testified how the silence encouraged people to begin assessing damage prematurely. When the backside of the storm arrived, destruction multiplied. These testimonies emphasized the consistent human vulnerability to silence, the instinct to trust peace, even when it is a trap. The silence also has physical markers beyond the absence of wind. Observers often describe the air as heavy, almost suffocating. This sensation is tied to the extreme low pressure within the storm's eye. As pressure drops, oxygen levels remain the same, but the body perceives the change in density as a kind of heaviness. Combined with stillness in the environment, it creates an atmosphere that feels alien, unlike ordinary weather conditions. The weight of the air adds to the psychological confusion, creating both relief and unease at the same time. What makes silence so dangerous is not just that it deceives, it actively encourages action. When the roar of the storm stops, people instinctively move. They check on neighbors, inspect property, and sometimes venture far from shelter. Yet, as countless disasters have shown, the second half of the storm often arrives with reversed winds. Roofs already loosened from one direction are torn away from the opposite side. Floodwaters surge further inland. Structures that survived the first assault collapse under the second. In this sense, silence does not just mislead, it multiplies destruction by luring people into harm's path. Meteorologists work hard to combat this misconception. Forecasts now emphasize the structure of storms, warning residents that if the eye passes overhead, the calm is temporary. The National Hurricane Center in the US repeatedly stresses, the storm is not over until the winds stop completely, not just briefly. Yet despite these warnings, human psychology remains vulnerable. Silence is so strongly associated with safety in everyday life that many ignore expert advice in the moment. The psychology of silence before storms also intersects with cultural beliefs. In some communities, calm skies are interpreted as divine mercy or spiritual protection. While these beliefs provide comfort, they can also create dangerous complacency. Emergency educators now work to frame silence differently, not as protection, but as a signal of imminent risk. By reframing cultural narratives, they hope to break the cycle of misinterpretation. Another factor is the role of animals. As discussed in other studies, birds, insects, and pets often fall silent before storms. This contributes to the unnatural quiet of the environment. Normally, even on still days, the world is alive with sound, chirping, buzzing, rustling. When those disappear alongside the wind, the absence becomes profound. To sensitive observers, it creates a sense of dread, but for others, it falsely suggests peace. Once again, silence speaks, but its message depends on how it is interpreted. Technological advances have reduced reliance on environmental cues, but silence remains relevant because disasters are lived experiences. Even with radar and satellite warnings, people base decisions on what they see and hear in the moment. If silence appears, it competes with official warnings in the human mind. This competition can prove fatal if people choose their senses over science. Consider Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Survivors in New Orleans described how during the storm's passage, moments of eerie stillness punctuated the chaos. For some, these moments offered false hope that the danger was subsiding. But in reality, flooding and structural collapses were only beginning. The silence did not mean the storm was over. It meant its most destructive consequences were about to unfold. The phenomenon extends beyond hurricanes. Tornadoes, too, are often preceded by sudden silence. Meteorologists note how the roar of wind can vanish just before a funnel cloud forms, leaving an unsettling quiet that lasts seconds before devastation. This similarity highlights a universal truth. In extreme weather, silence is not peace. It is the prelude to impact. So why does the atmosphere grow so quiet? The mechanics are complex, but the key lies in pressure and motion. As storms intensify, air circulates rapidly. When the eye or lull arrives, vertical air movements dominate over horizontal winds, suppressing surface gusts. The balance shifts from noise-making turbulence to subdued descent. Sound itself travels differently in these conditions, refracting through temperature and pressure gradients in ways that dampen familiar noises. To the human ear, the environment feels muted, as if sound itself has been swallowed. Understanding this scientifically is important, but understanding it emotionally is just as crucial. Silence triggers instinctive reactions. For some, it sparks dread. For others, it sparks relief. The tragedy is that relief often overrides caution, leading people to step outside when they should remain sheltered. Breaking this cycle requires education, storytelling, and cultural memory. Survivors who share their experiences of silence followed by destruction create powerful lessons for future generations. In the end, the atmospheric silence before impact is one of nature's most deceptive phenomena. It carries the weight of centuries of misinterpretation, yet it also holds the key to awareness. If we can learn to read silence not as safety but as signal, we may save lives. The message must be clear. When the world goes quiet before a storm, it is not time to celebrate. It is time to prepare for the fiercest strike. Across cultures, continents, and centuries, the memory of silence before a storm has left a deep imprint. Whether in Florida during a hurricane, in the Philippines facing a typhoon, or in Japan preparing for a typhoon landfall, people describe the same eerie lull. The vanishing of wind, the unnatural stillness of trees, the heavy weight of air pressing on skin, and the unsettling quiet that descends across the landscape. It is an experience so universal that it transcends language. And yet, despite its consistency, the silence remains one of the most misunderstood signals of extreme weather. Scientific research provides clarity. Dr. Matthew Eastin's studies on atmospheric dynamics explain that silence is not a reprieve, but a function of storm structure. The low pressure and subsiding air within the eye create a deceptive zone of calm. The U.S. Hurricane Research Division, through decades of reconnaissance flights and field studies, has mapped the structure of these storms, confirming that the eye's silence is surrounded by the eyewall, the most violent region of the cyclone. Together, these findings prove that silence is not an ending, but a transition. It is the space between phases of violence, not the conclusion of danger. Yet, science alone cannot erase centuries of cultural misinterpretation. In many communities, the silence has been remembered as mercy or even divine protection. Survivors of past storms recall stepping into the calm, believing prayers had been answered, only to face the storm's return with devastating consequences. These stories repeat across time because the silence is psychologically powerful. Humans are wired to trust peace, to welcome quiet, to interpret stillness as safety. In everyday life, those instincts serve us well. But in the face of a hurricane, they betray us. Consider the Caribbean, where hurricanes have shaped history for centuries. Folklore in islands like Puerto Rico and Dominica speaks of the whisper of the storm or the still breath of the sea. Elders warned that when the air grew too quiet, danger was near. Their warnings aligned with modern meteorology, but younger generations, unfamiliar with such traditions, sometimes dismissed them. During Hurricane Maria in 2017, silence before the eyewall's arrival misled many. People walked outside, only to be caught by the storm's second assault. The disaster reminded communities of a lesson once known instinctively. Silence is a warning, not a gift. In Asia, the same pattern exists. Villagers in the Philippines describe the silence before typhoons as nakakabingi, literally so quiet it is deafening. Farmers remember how the air grew heavy, animals fell silent, and insects disappeared. These observations mirror scientific findings. Barometric pressure shifts, suppressed convection, and muted soundscapes. What local communities sensed intuitively, researchers later explained with instruments. But the message remained the same. When silence arrives, the storm is not finished. It is about to unleash its worst. Even in modern urban settings where satellite forecasts and emergency alerts dominate, silence continues to play a role. During Hurricane Harvey in 2017, residents of Houston reported eerie stillness between storm bands. For some, this false calm encouraged them to venture outside. Within hours, torrential rain resumed, flooding streets and trapping those who underestimated the danger. Technology can warn, but perception still influences decision-making. When the body feels peace, it resists the brain's logic. From a scientific perspective, the silence also reveals fascinating aspects of sound and perception. Hurricanes generate infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the threshold of human hearing. These sounds, produced by turbulence and pressure differences, travel long distances through the air and ground. Animals such as elephants, dogs, and even birds detect these vibrations. Humans cannot, but when infrasound shifts, the overall noise environment changes. Combined with the suppression of surface winds in the eye, the result is an environment that feels muted, even uncanny. Our ears, accustomed to constant sound, interpret the absence as silence, even if subtle noises continue. This atmospheric silence has a unique psychological effect. It heightens awareness, making the world feel fragile and unreal. Survivors often describe how time itself seemed to pause, as if the world were holding its breath. In reality, the storm was reorganizing, gathering strength for its next strike. The silence was not time stopping, but energy shifting. For those who misunderstood, it became a fatal pause. For those who understood, it became a moment to prepare for impact. One of the most dangerous aspects of silence is its asymmetry. The first half of the storm often weakens structures, loosens debris, and saturates soil. The second half, arriving after the lull, strikes with winds from the opposite direction. Roofs that held against one angle collapse against the reverse. Trees already stressed topple more easily. Floodwaters rise higher, driven inland with renewed force. The silence, then, is not only deceptive, it is strategically destructive. It encourages movement at precisely the moment when vulnerability is greatest. Emergency managers now frame the silence as one of the deadliest hazards in hurricanes. Public campaigns repeat a simple phrase, "Don't be fooled by the calm." Yet despite these warnings, the silence continues to mislead. The challenge is not only to teach meteorology, but to retrain instincts. To learn that in hurricanes, the absence of sound is not safety but danger. That lesson, ingrained through repetition, may one day save lives. Globally, the silence has become part of the cultural language of storms. In literature, film, and everyday speech, the calm before the storm symbolizes temporary peace before chaos. But in reality, the calm is not symbolic at all. It is literal, physical, and deadly. The phrase captures a universal experience that unites humanity across geography. The deceptive stillness of the atmosphere before destruction. By studying it, remembering it, and teaching it, we can turn that universal experience into a tool of survival rather than a trap. As climate change intensifies hurricanes and typhoons, the silence may become even more pronounced. Stronger storms with more defined eyes will produce longer, deeper calms. For coastal populations, the danger of misinterpreting those silences grows alongside the storms themselves. The lesson is urgent. Silence is not a reprieve. It is a red flag, a deceptive interlude, a mask worn by the storm before it reveals its full power. So when the world goes quiet, when the wind ceases and the air hangs heavy, when the birds vanish and even the sea seems to stop, remember this: you are not safe. You are in the storm's shadow, standing in the fragile space between its two walls of fury. The silence is not a blessing, it is a countdown. And that is why silence should never be trusted. Not before hurricanes, not before typhoons, not before any storm. Because silence is the storm's most dangerous lie. Here on Crisis Lens, we dig into the truths behind disasters, the science, the history, the survival lessons. If you want to understand the world's most dangerous events, not just as news headlines, but as lived experiences, subscribe now. Share this video with others who need to hear the warning, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The storms will keep coming. The question is whether we will listen, learn, and prepare. Nature always gives us signals. Noise is one of them. Silence is another. The choice is ours, to mistake stillness for safety or to recognize it as the storm's final warning. At Crisis Lens, we believe awareness is survival. Stay with us, and together we'll face the silence before impact with open eye.